The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending BorderConnect's webinar on learning about different shipment types for Canada. My name is Justin Knowlton, moderator for today's webinar, and for those of you that weren't updated on today's webinar change, it will be just focusing on the release types for Canadian-bound shipments and not the original scheduled learning about shipments for Canada and the United States. I apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused. We will, however, be scheduling a future webinar for learning about different shipment types for US-bound shipments on Tuesday, July 28th. So keep an eye on BorderConnect's event page or Facebook page for information on how to register. Today's webinar will be hosted by Debbie Dent. Debbie is BorderConnect's Director of Consulting Services and has nearly 35 years of experience in the customs and international logistics fields. She will be sharing her expertise on the different shipment types for crossing into Canada. For anyone who has questions, we will have a question and answer session at the conclusion of the webinar. To ask a question, you can simply click the raise hand icon, and once you're acknowledged, type in the question, and Debbie will answer your question for you. So without further ado, here is Debbie Dent.
Thanks, Justin. Let's get started. Sorry, we're having just a small problem here with the screen changer. Not working. Just give me the. Here we go. Okay, the Canadian release options today that we're going to be featuring and are common to commercial carriers crossing the Canadian border. The Custom Self-Assessment, or CSA, often now called FAST, is simply an enhanced release option for the carrier. It's designed for pre-approved importers, the party responsible for the customs clearance, carriers, and a registered driver. To take advantage of the program, CSA-approved importers and carriers must submit an application, be approved, and then use a registered driver to carry CSA-eligible goods into Canada. The CSA program simplifies many of the import border requirements, so these new so now considered low-risk shipments can be processed more quickly and efficiently at the border. Pre-arrival review system, or PARS, allows importers and brokers to submit the release information necessary for a customs review and processing before the goods arrive in Canada, and this is really considered to be the general release option that a carrier will use when crossing the border into Canada. Release on minimum documentation, or RMD, is a paper process. PARS replaced the RMD requirement many years ago, but there still are shipments that do qualify and do require to be processed through that paper process that we'll feature and explain a little more clearly when we get into the presentation. As well, the automotive report and release, the A49, this is strictly used by Chrysler, GM, and Ford, commonly reporting auto production parts. And those three companies were extended some privileges that has basically been in a pilot state for many, many years. Tools of international traffic are containers that are shipping back and forth across the border, often considered to be part of what was a container bank once upon a time, and are identified by an Ottawa file number. And then we have in-bond, which means moving shipments that are uncleared away from the primary point of arrival to another location within Canada for customs clearance, or temporary entry processing, and those again we'll get into some specifics as we move forward. All of these release options are going to be required to be reported and submitted electronically. That program, Advanced Commercial Information, or ACI, commonly called e-manifest, it is the carrier's responsibility to report electronically at least 1 hour prior to a physical arrival to any Canadian-U.S. border point. Your e-manifest includes reporting any shipments on that truck as part of that cross-border trip. So in preparation for what's coming on July the 10th, 2015, and what's in place right now for those of you that are participating in the ACI or e-manifest, we want to ensure that you understand the various release types and the explanation and customs processing of those release types. Even an empty truck must be reported coming to Canada as of July 10th, and every carrier, commercial carrier, whether private or for hire, will need to have a valid carrier code. The only exception to this not submitting an electronic release ahead of time is bobtailing. And a bobtail is defined as a tractor with no trailer. So for example, a straight truck or a cargo van can't consider themselves to be bobtailing. The Custom Self-Assessment, or CSA, for carriers, as we mentioned already, is that enhanced release option, and it does include and identify a CSA-approved importer of record, the party that is responsible for the customs clearance that has undergone that approval, the approved highway carrier that again has gone through that process, and a pre-approved driver. And customs definition of a pre-approved driver is a driver that has and is the holder of a valid FAST or CDRP card. And then clearing eligible goods as what has been defined by the importer of record as part of their application. As well, it's going to include delivering to an approved site location as agreed to and outlined again by that approved importer into Canada. CSA, or that release option, can be presented in a regular truck lane, but if a carrier is both CSA and approved for our Partners in Protection, or PIP program, ultimately being considered FAST for Canada, then that truck with that approved driver can be in a FAST designated truck lane into Canada where those lanes may be available. So here's a bit of a snapshot of what a CSA shipment would look like. You'll notice on the screen there's a card. It says CSA Border Lead Sheet. This is a CSA lead sheet. You actually tell Customs as part of your application process how you'll identify these shipments. It will include your carrier code in a barcoded format that Customs will scan. It will include the business number of the importer of record, the party responsible for the customs clearance, and ultimately those goods being defined for. And that will be scanned. And then the driver's FAST card will also be scanned as part of that release option. The FAST card is verified by the Customs to belong to that driver. And then all of those three barcoded elements, so Customs, the officer will scan those three barcodes, basically registering that particular release or that particular shipment that's been presented to Customs at the first point of arrival. If any of those three barcoded elements cannot be met, for example, the driver has forgotten his FAST card today and it can't be met, then as a carrier, you would be responsible to refer or to use alternate release options, most commonly the A49 if the goods would be for Chrysler, GM, or Ford, or you would switch to a PARS type release option. This particular release option is just what it's called, self-assessing. So Customs actually just records your registration at the border, but doesn't stamp or doesn't return anything back to the driver. So the only proof that you have is that verbal authorization that the driver has moved forward. PARS, pre-arrival review, this is that more general release option. And commonly what happens is a driver or a shipper or your internal operations will place a barcoded PARS label on a shipping invoice or the bill of lading, and will also indicate the ETA and the port of arrival. Those documents, along with one complete set of all paperwork provided by the shipper, will be forwarded to the assigned customs broker in order for that customs broker to prepare an entry and file it with customs in advance of that truck's arrival. That part is the broker's responsibility and your responsibility to ensure that it's on file with customs. Your responsibility also now to go along with that PARS notification, that line release option, is to ensure that the e-manifest is also submitted referencing that PARS number as your shipment control number, indicating the same port of arrival as provided to the customs broker. Verifying your PARS is received, processed, and on file with customs is mandatory and will be mandatory at all ports of entry with the implementation now of ACI. Currently, for example, if you arrived at Windsor without a PARS on file, you would be returned back to Detroit. At other ports, those were considered to be a failed PARS, and the truck would be allowed to move to a parking location and go and visit a customs broker. That will end as of July 10th, or we expect that to end. So a snapshot of that PARS example. So the barcode is placed on a location on the invoice where it won't hide any information, and that is faxed to the customs broker in advance of the truck's arrival. As well, the ACI lead sheet and the barcoded lead sheet that we're using in this sample identifies the conveyance reference number, and then the cargo control number would be the barcode that was assigned on that invoice. As well, the driver identification needs to be submitted with this, identifying the driver that's presenting for this particular shipment. In this next screen, we're going through the example of PARS, and our platform, BorderConnect, provides you the ability to have what's called a release notification system. That PARS that screen will show you directly that this particular shipment is on file. So our example of our PARS detail in this particular case, the cargo control number, or the PARS number, is identified. The transaction number that identifies the customs broker's unique entry number, that's also associated. It will tell you what type of service option, so in this particular case it's a PARS and it's electronic, the releasing office, and that customs has accepted this particular transaction, so it's been processed by the broker, and it's now just awaiting the truck's arrival. You can do this as well, or have something equivalent to this, by visiting custom brokers' websites. They also will indicate, or by making a phone call to the custom broker to ensure that the PARS is on file prior to the truck's arrival. Once the truck has arrived at the border, the shipment will be released, so the barcode will be scanned by the officer, who will pull forward the details that's already been pre-filed by the customs broker, and that will trigger a release in the system or further instruction moving to secondary inspection. So again, looking at BorderConnect in our platform of the RNS release example, I can see the message that this particular shipment was accepted, it was pending the arrival of the truck, and now that customs has performed that release, I get a confirmation that that shipment has actually been processed and released by customs. Many of our customers use this release and this ability to have this information at their fingertips, not only to confirm that the truck properly cleared at the border, but also to schedule, for example, delivery appointments and things like that, because the unknown in the previous was when was the truck actually released by customs. And to the side of the screen is what we call a proof of release. It has all of the data elements and is as good as a stamped copy provided by customs. Something I didn't mention, in this particular, the PARS release option, the customs will always stamp a document to prove, and that becomes part of your record keeping, that that particular truck has in fact been released properly at the border. If the driver doesn't have a stamped copy to return back to you, and without an electronic platform to confirm that that release has occurred, you could be subject to that freight actually moving without the proper customs authority and a penalty occur. Then we get into the paper RMD, or that A8A. An A88 is a 5-part cargo control document that was used, often referred to as the manifest, and now with the introduction of ACI or e-manifest, the same data elements that can be found on an A8A are found as part of the content of what you build electronically in advance of the truck's arrival. But if the driver is meeting a requirement or going to be presenting a shipment that does qualify and is going to clear on that A8A, then the driver will present that completed A8A. He's going to handwrite those fields on that document, and he'll present that at the first point of arrival and then be directed to the secondary commercial processing. The driver then will visit the customs broker's office to receive probably some sort of a release package, and then will report back to customs for final release authorization. Upon processing by customs, that driver will be returned again a stamped copy and one part of that A8A document, and be provided directions for leaving the commercial customs area. RMD will also be required to be reported electronically through the e-manifest process, but until a full e-manifest rollout is in place, the driver will still be required to have that A8A document. This process is also used when a PARS may fail. Customs may require the driver to complete the A8A document, indicating the PARS number as the cargo control number, and then be put through that paper process when he's arrived at the border and dealing with the customs broker. So an example of an A8A form, it includes fields manifested from and to is where the truck has arrived. So for example, if that truck has arrived at Windsor and is going to be released at Windsor, then manifested to and from would show Windsor, Ontario, or port 453, the code for the Windsor, Ontario location. The consignee's name and address needs to be provided to customs. That would be where those goods are going to be delivered. The shipper's name and address, so where did those goods come from? The number of pieces, so the smallest packaging units, whether it's pallets, cartons, how many is on that truck. A basic general description, the weight, the license plate of that particular trailer that those goods are on, and of course your barcoded cargo control number is including your 4-digit carrier code as well as a unique number for this, identifying this specific shipment. As well, if you've electronically reported that shipment, you're going to have the ACI lead sheet, and then of course the driver's identification to personally identify that driver and to meet those immigration requirements. The A49, the automotive release. This is a special release option used, as I mentioned, only by Chrysler, GM, and Ford. It was commonly used to identify auto production parts, and it provided Chrysler, GM, and Ford really an enhanced or a more a quicker process to get across the border. It doesn't require a broker to be pre-notified. It didn't require any kind of advance reporting, but it will under the e-manifest rules. It should be used only now when the CSA release option cannot be met. So for example, if the carrier is not approved for that program, or the carrier may be approved for that program, but in fact the driver doesn't have a FAST or a CDRB card. The A49 document is completed by the carrier and or provided by the shipper. That document now should be barcoded with a shipment reference number in order to link to an e-manifest that will be required to be filed if you're not doing that already as of July the 10th. The A49 document is actually kept by customs and no copy will be returned to the driver. But if an ACI cover sheet document is presented, so that that e-manifest is on file as well, the customs will stamp that ACI cover sheet and return that back to the driver. The A49 example here is a completed A49 document with the information. These documents can be found right online through a PDF or again provided commonly by the shipper. The ACI lead sheet would be completed with a trip number and then the conveyance reference number. Some companies are using a PARS number, some companies are using a barcode that includes A49 to specifically identify it. But a shipment control number will be required, but it's for reference purposes only. It's not like a PARS number where that cargo control number is uniquely identifying that PARS shipments. In this case, it's used strictly as a reference number. As well, this particular release option requires the driver to have a driver identification. Now, in this case, if the driver should present the FAST card, then the driver should have, in fact, used the CSA release option if, in fact, the company that he's hauling for is CSA or FAST approved for Canada. Tools of international trade or empty dunnage, containers that are shuttling back and forth across the border, still referred to as the Ottawa file number and are and were pre-qualified by the people that own those container banks. You have tools of international traffic that if it's a first-time import, they must still go through a regular entry process. They will be required to be reported electronically, but these particular types of shipments are not actually considered a shipment. They're actually, in an e-manifest world, considered to be a cargo exemption. And you select that cargo exemption, you select that you're identifying IITs, and then you specifically tell customs where's the location of those IITs. Is it on the truck or is it on the trailer? Ports in Canada, especially where a high number of these types of shipments occur, have created a number of processes that will be eliminated. For example, a truck coming in may be able to just write the Ottawa file number on a bill of lading and be allowed to move forward today. A company that is CSA approved that has that also is hauling for example, Chrysler, GM, and Ford can use that CSA lead sheet and just advise customs that it's IIT on board rather than a CSA shipment on board. All of these processes are going to be basically eliminated, and the IIT is going to have to be electronically reported as part of an e-manifest. And we should mention that although that electronic report is going to tell customs that you have IITs on board, it's also important for you to have that Ottawa file number on hand because customs may require that number. So it's very important to distinguish between containers that are under this container bank or the Ottawa file numbers and containers that might be a first-time import and they're actually a shipment and should be actually releasing under the PARS release option rather than IITs. In bond means that the goods are not going to clear at the first primary location of arrival, and they're going to move further inland in Canada for further processing or for customs clearance. Only carriers arriving in Canada identified with a bonded carrier code, and a bonded carrier is a carrier that, as well as their carrier code that has been provided by customs, associated to that code is minimally a $25,000 surety bond that must be maintained on an annual basis, can move in bond. In-bond movements will currently be sort of a paper electronic process until the full deployment of ACI is complete, and is used to move uncleared goods beyond that first point of arrival. Commonly, these goods will be reported at an inland bond shed for customs entry processing. They may also be cleared by a private importer somewhere other than at that first point of arrival. The carrier and the driver will still be required to complete that paper A8A cargo control document, having that, similar to what we looked at on the previous screen, identifying the first point of arrival as well as where the goods are actually going to be moving to, the port code for that particular location. So in-bond movement will require an e-manifest to be on file with Customs in advance of arrival, matching the information that will be handwritten or found on that AAA document. A driver will be required to present that paper AAA at the inland bond shed or at the location where the goods are actually clearing so that that final accounting will still occur. So an example, again, the only difference in completing that AAA document is that manifested from will show the primary first point of arrival where the freight is arriving, and where it's going to will now indicate the port that the freight is moving to. So for example, if the freight had come across at Sarnia, arrived at port 440, and was going to Toronto to the inland bond shed at 496, it would indicate that those goods are going to actually clear at that port 496. As well, the ACI lead sheet would indicate the cargo control number, which would match the A8A, and the driver's identification would be required to identify the driver presenting this particular release option. The A8A document, once it's separated by Customs, will be returned back to the driver moving in bond, and that driver will show that same document on arrival at the clearance location, and after the clearance has occurred at that inland location, that A8A document will be stamped and returned back, or confirmed release has occurred within an electronic system. E29B, a temporary admission permit, this is one of those other type of temporary release options that you might run into. And again, these will be required to be submitted electronically through the e-manifest. It's a process that is done by a customs broker to identify goods that are only coming to Canada for a temporary time frame. So for example, it might be show goods or something coming in for display or something coming in for repairs. The carrier will complete the A8A cargo control document and will be required to report to the customs broker to receive now the E29B, or the broker's entry document, that will be submitted to Customs for that secondary processing. This release type will be reported electronically, selecting the release type E29B that can be found within your e-manifest process. But at this point, it's sort of like the in-bond, it's going to have a paper electronic process. 2 copies of that E29B document will be provided back to the driver after Customs has processed that particular entry type, as well as the stamped copy of the A8A document, because the driver is considered to be releasing at the first point of arrival, and those same documents will be required, as far as the E29B, will be required to be provided to the Customs when those same goods are now leaving Canada after having been used or temporarily displayed, whatever the conditions of that E29B are. The other type of release options that you're going to see, and within the in the e-manifest process, is called the ATA Carnet, is one of those. Similar to an E29B process, but it allows the owner of the Carnet to file a blanket permission to carry goods that are coming back and forth from one country to another often. Show bands or equipment used by bands, for example, or the race cars, things like that. Those will be filed on an ATA Carnet. And again, that E29B, or that e-manifest release type, you'll find ATA Carnet on there. Paper B3 is a document that is the responsibility of the importer of record to complete. A broker actually prepares a B3 document to account for commercial goods. But in this case, it's a paper B3 is a cash entry, and it's done by the owner of the goods on arrival at the port. Commonly, this particular release option is often used by companies that also own their own truck and might not have the ability to actually have an account with Customs, and they're going to pay on a cash basis at the particular time of Customs clearance. Goods astray, that release type refers to goods that may have been shipped accidentally to the U.S. and then need to be returned back to Canada. This is the option that would identify for the officer that those goods went basically astray and now are returning back to Canada. Supporting documentation to goods astray might be the original bill of lading that showed those goods were actually a domestic delivery within Canada, but somehow got loaded onto a truck destined for the U.S. and need to be returned in order to make that delivery back into Canada. So supporting documents would be that original bill of lading. Then you'll run into orders in council. These are special authorizations that are provided to the importer of record, that party again responsible for the customs clearance, with specific handling instructions. There are a variety of different order in councils. They usually have a special authority number that are associated to them. And these would have some direction from the importer and what is required. For example, in the tool and mold world, there is molds that are coming back for repair. They were given a low-risk program, and on the A8A, the driver would fill out an A8A. In the acquittal field, the driver would indicate the order in council number provided by the importer and not have to go to the customs broker to make that release. Personal goods, of course, are goods that are not for commercial use, but may be actually declared or carried by a commercial carrier. For example, someone moving to Canada that may, in fact, use a commercial carrier to do that. So again, meeting those conditions that are outlined by customs, personal goods, you would indicate the release type of goods that you have on board are personal goods so that customs would have and would be receiving the documentation necessary to account for those personal goods. Other cargo exemptions, although these aren't in some cases considered release types, very important to understand that these other types of shipments do need to be reported when coming into Canada under certain circumstances. So for example, there's a program called Courier Low Value Shipments. This is again a program that is designed for couriers that apply for permission to use this program that carry multiple shipments like a UPS, a FedEx, a Purolator company, and where the value of those shipments are $2,500 or less. It allows that courier to have another release option available to them, and they will as well file an e-manifest, but under the cargo exemptions, they will tell customs that they have a trailer load or a truckload of courier low value shipments that will be processing under the conditions of that particular program. You may also have postal shipments that are meant to go into the mail in Canada. If the truck has a postal shipment and it's a commercial postal, it is supposed to be reported, and again, those cargo exemptions would be associated to where that mail is found. Is it in the trailer? Is it in the truck? Another type of cargo exemption is called the flying trucks. This is a truck that's identified that's carrying goods that will be delivered to an airline in Canada and that are already documented on an airway bill. Again, they not really a release or a shipment type, but a cargo exemption, and you tell the customs that those goods are going to be are already really identified on that airway bill and commonly aren't for clearance in Canada but moving forward by airline. Canadian companies, not a U.S. carrier, but a Canadian company also has to declare any emergency repairs that they may have had while outside of Canada. So those services or goods are not subject to duty or tax collection, but they are subject to a report. And currently, a paper process for these emergency repairs was the driver presenting a bill that indicated that the tire blew up and that they had to replace that tire and what the value of that repair was. That can now be done as part of a cargo exemption, as part of that report electronically, or can continue to be just presented to customs. There is a $100 penalty per occurrence where this emergency repair isn't done once, if that's discovered during a general carrier audit. Cargo exemptions are not considered a shipment report, but are reported as part of the conveyance report, so what's on that truck, and are associated to the truck or the trailer wherever they might be placed. Again, this isn't really a release type, but I get this question asked all the time about going in transit through Canada, especially by U.S. carriers that are close, for example, in Michigan, and maybe want to cut through Canada to go to New York. An in-transit manifest, or vice versa, a Canadian carrier that may want to go, for example, through Detroit, Michigan, and go to the Sioux. It's a domestic clearance in both countries, but where you're going to cut through the other country to make that delivery. So an in-transit manifest form is completed, and the fields that would be required to be completed are the license plate of the conveyance, the tractor, the trailer, the port of departure where that shipment is leaving Canada or United States, the re-entry, again. The only carriers that can do this in-transit move now are carriers that are also considered a bonded carrier, so their carrier code identifies the bond that's associated to that carrier code, so they would complete that information. The port and date of arrival and the port and date of exit, it would, if the conveyance is able to be sealed, would include the seal and customs identifying the seal number on that form, and then any sort of a description of what's on board so that customs can confirm what you're saying is leaving in transit is going to also be still on that conveyance, and no other shipments have been added while you report to the exit point. At that point, you would be processed going into the U.S. or into Canada just as if, again, it was a domestic shipment. It's really just allowing that the ability to go in transit. So at this stage, we're going to maybe get into some questions and some answers. Justin advised you what you would need to do to ask the questions. This particular webinar is going to be recorded. If you want any more detailed step-by-step instructions for those various release options, we do have those available, and I welcome you to contact the consulting at BorderConnect.com and request those. So I'll turn it over now to see if we have any questions as a result of the information we provided you today.
Okay, we're going to move on to the question and answer session. For those of you that aren't familiar with the webinar interface and how it works, there is a small raise hand icon on the chat interface. So simply raise your hand and then type in your question once you've been responded to. So does anybody have any questions? Okay, looks like Raymond does. Go ahead, Raymond, and type in your question. Okay, Joel has a question. Do you have any recommendations for software for a small business to file their own B3 entries with CBSA prior to arrival, rather than filling them in person at a computer station in the customs office?
Hi. One of the questions that we had was from Joel, and it to do with the software for producing a B3 document prior to, instead of at the customs station. And unfortunately, there are several softwares. Some of them are used by customs brokers. They probably can be a little more involved and costly than what you might get into. There is, the B3 document is a PDF that is available on Canada Border Services website, and you can complete that PDF right online. And then you'd have to scan it to save it, but it is an alternative. I apologize, there's just not any real simple way to create that B3 at this point electronically, or at least that I'm aware of. Thank you, Joel.
Does anybody else have a question? It looks like we have Shelley that has her hand raised. Shelley, if you could use the chat box and just simply type in your question there, we'll be glad to answer it. Okay, it looks like Joel's got another question for you, Deb, while we wait for Shelley. Joel asks, are you aware of any special requirements for shipments containing firearms, if they can be done on PARs, or do they need an RMD paper package?
Okay, Joel's question had to do with firearms and the import process and whether they can be done on the release option PARs. I would recommend contacting a customs broker for that specific scenario. The release type PARs could be used, but may undergo different scrutiny by customs, obviously, based on the type of commodity that it is. So I would talk to a customs broker or contact customs firsthand before making any kind of importation and a designated release option. Commonly, you're probably going to go through as much scrutiny with a PARS that you would with a paper cargo control document, so probably just as easy to continue to do it on that cargo control document.
Okay, it looks like Shelley now has a question. Shelley asks, partial loads coming from a ship that the bond has to be cleared at U.S. Customs, is ACI still required? Will we need clarification on that question, Debbie?
Okay, so Shelley, if I can understand your question, I'm assuming these goods have come in on the ship into Canada. They are in bond, so they're moving in bond from the pier or the location where those goods are offloaded, and that bonded movement is going to be done on that A8A manifest. So you're moving those goods in bond, you're canceling the bond at the port of where the goods will actually leave to enter the United States, and then the ACE would also be required as part of the entry into the U.S. and whatever the customs clearance for those same goods for the U.S. Now, if it's sort of the opposite direction that we're talking about, then that would be a different response than what I've just given you. Maybe, Shelley, you can confirm that that does answer what your question was meant to be.
Okay, it looks like she did add to her question. They have come by ship into the U.S., and we are bringing them into Canada.
Okay, so they've arrived in the U.S. They are for destination or delivery into Canada. So they are traveling within the U.S. as a bonded shipment. So that bond would need to be closed before the goods left the United States, and then those same goods would enter into Canada under one of the variety of release options. At that point, they may, if they're for clearance at the first point of arrival and they're actually going to be cleared by an import of record, could qualify for PARs. If they're still in bond, then the in bond for the United States is separate from the in bond process for Canada.
Okay, it looks like Joel has another question. I believe it's to add to his previous question regarding firearms and any exemptions are necessary. Joel asks, I believe there's an ACI e-manifest exception for HCG, hand-carried goods, by a business owner in their own vehicle, not a commercial conveyance. Is this HCG exemption a single use, or can it be used repeatedly by a business owner arriving their own vehicle?
Okay, Joel, Customs sort of did a about face with that hand carry. A hand carry is not a single use. If you are not for hire and these goods do belong to you, you will qualify and continue to be able to use the hand carry or under that hand carry notice. Customs were actually refusing to issue a carrier code to a private company that basically were not for hire and were carrying just their own goods. They've kind of done an about face, so you can in fact now get a carrier code, avoid that hand carry issue, and be able then to meet some of these other release options that are available to commercial carriers. So you can choose to do which way you want, but a hand carry is not strictly a one-time scenario, or like in the old days where if you used a carry, if you you had a limit of 5 times that you could cross the border in one given year under a generic carrier code. Those rules have all gone by the wayside with that hand carry notice.
Okay, it looks like Shelley has another question to ask you. Shelley asks, the driver clears the bond on the U.S. side now, but then has to do a manual clearance with a broker at the border. Do they still need to notify through an ACI that this load is coming? These are usually partial loads.
Yes, Shelley, the e-manifest or ACI will be required because, again, the bonded transaction ended when you close that bond at the point where the goods are going to export the United States. So whatever is required now to clear these particular goods into Canada would need to be done. And yes, an e-manifest, if it's a PARS release for that partial shipment that's going to be now for a Canadian importer, those would be faxed to that customs broker and done through that e-manifest report for you as a carrier. Again, it would be based on whatever the release type is for the import of those goods and the condition that they're coming to Canada. If they're for they're sold or they're for importation, then it would be any of those release types that we've already discussed.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Again, to ask a question, you'll notice that there's a chat box in the application itself. And we'll wait a few moments here to see if anybody else has any questions. Okay, it looks like everyone's questions have been answered. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar. This concludes our question and answer session. And we would like to thank everyone for attending. Our next webinar, as you can see, will be on Thursday, May 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it will highlight everything you need to know regarding ACI becoming mandatory and everything you need to know before July 10th, which could be the mandatory date when non-monetary AMPS penalties may be filed against your company. To register, email justin@borderconnect.com, and I will send you a registration link, or simply visit our events page on borderconnect.com. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, please contact our toll-free number at 888-596-5176 or email Debbie directly at consulting@borderconnect.com. Thank you, and everyone, have a nice day.